May 11, 1992 Observer Newsletter. SID suspended from WWE. Beginnings of AAA? More WWE scandals. By Observer staff. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. May 11, 1992. The continuing saga of Sid Audi took another strange turn this past week. The former Sid Vicious, now Sid Justice at least as of last week, was officially suspended for a period of no less than 6 weeks by the World Wrestling Federation for its all-inclusive term, unprofessional conduct. This came after Justice stormed out of the Boston Garden after a match last Sunday night with the Ultimate Warrior because he was unhappy over either the way they were going to the finish itself, the finish was him losing via disqualification in about 4 minutes, and or the working proficiency of his opponent, which many have termed a pot calling the kettle black story. As the week went on, the story was Justice had, in this order, quit, been fired and been suspended. On Monday, Papa Shango, Charles Wright, was contacted and flown to the Northeast for a show that night in Rochester, New York to take Justice's spot in main events against Warrior from his Midwestern booking since word was out that Justice had gone AWOL and quit the promotion. Justice hasn't appeared since, including missing television tapings on Tuesday and Wednesday. In Sunday's Tokyo Sports, it was reported that Justice, who it is believed has a little more than 1 year left on his WWF contract, was negotiating with New Japan, although the New Japan office didn't confirm the story. This marks the 3rd straight year that Justice hasn't worked during this time of year, softball season. 2 years ago, while recuperating from a collapsed lung, the then Sid Vicious no-showed World Championship Wrestling house shows in which he was supposed to appear in the corner, as he hadn't gotten clearance to wrestle, in lieu of apparently playing in a local softball league, which gained him his reputation as Softball Sid. Last year at this time he quit WCW after attempting, and succeeding, but still quitting anyway, getting his contract renegotiated due to the lure of the promised WrestleMania main event against Hulk Hogan the following year. He then took a few months off, just working television tapings, before starting on the road in August with the WWF. At the television tapings Wednesday night in Syracuse, a major angle was shot to marry up Shango with Warrior to be the WWF's other headline match for the foreseeable future to go along with Randy Savage vs. Ric Flair on the other tour. In addition, USWA champ Kamala, James Harris, was brought in to be the new protege of Harvey Whippleman. Kamala is expected to drop the USWA title on May 4th in Memphis to Jerry Lawler. In last week's Observer, we reported that a major WWF wrestler had allegedly falsified his steroid test about a week before WrestleMania by using someone else's urine out of a Visine bottle rather than his own, that the incident was reported and the wrestler had not been suspended. At the time, there were some wrestlers somewhat miffed over the apparent lack of punishment for the incident that had become well known, feeling it established that there were 2 sets of rules in the WWF in regard to the steroid issue. Others felt if they were found to have done the same thing, they would be suspended immediately as per the WWF steroid policy statement, even though nobody questioned the decision not to suspend before WrestleMania. According to another source, it wasn't clean urine from a Visine bottle, but apparently one of the wrestlers was able to get a large supply of the bottles the urine specimens are sent in. According to the source, the tests are indeed monitored to make sure it is the person's urine that goes in the bottle, but in carrying an identical bottle on the person, with someone else's clean urine, the person is able to make a switch after he is monitored if need be. Supposedly this has been common practice at least with a few obvious candidates. We were, in fact, talking about Justice, whose name wasn't revealed last week because of all that was going on with him right at press time and the supposition that he still might be suspended. His 6-week suspension, part of not being around for now, may be related to that alleged incident and certainly is heavily rumored to be. While we have been unable to reach Steve Planamenta of the WWF before press time, Planamenta did tell Alex Merves of 3 Count in regard to the report of the test falsification. I can't say if the report is true or false, but I wouldn't fault you if you printed it. It is expected that at some point Justice will be brought back to the WWF, if he is willing to return, and there is some question about that. But WWF officials over the weekend were expecting him back in 6 weeks to 2 months. He will probably be given a new program at that time, since Warrior and Shango will be working on top for the next few months. It's debatable whether his return is even in the promotion's best interest. While an imposing presence right now, as many have noted, his main attribute is in having the monster size and physique which the current rules against steroids would seemingly make very difficult, wink, wink, if not impossible to have. It brings up the double standard question and credibility of the testing if he's brought back in his monster form. But everything else about him is a question mark given his track record in regard to injuries and quitting, not to mention that some in the WWF have said his presence in the dressing rooms creates the biggest morale problem the company now has. But in his monster form, he is seemingly the easiest wrestler in the country for either major promotion to get over with little effort. But whether him being over as an individual is any kind of an asset to a company is very much in question. Probably yes as far as merchandising, and probably no as far as long-term booking for the overall good of the company as a whole. The WWF also canceled 4 more shows this past weekend, bringing the total of cancellations to 6 since starting back in the United States after Wrestlemania. After working before a weak house on Thursday night in Las Vegas, the WWF canceled the remainder of the West Coast Swing and the Monday night show in Jacksonville, all headlined by Flair vs. Savage, due to both racial tension and weak advances. The Friday night show in Long Beach would have had to have been canceled no matter what due to the second day of major rioting in the area after the verdict in the Rodney King beating case came out. Virtually all sports and entertainment events in that area scheduled for that night were canceled. However, that doesn't seem to be a valid excuse in the cancellation of the Saturday night show in Fresno and Sunday night card in San Francisco, as there were no outbursts in Fresno and all sports and entertainment events in Northern California were already back on as scheduled as of Saturday. In addition, the Monday night card in Jacksonville was canceled because of a poor advance before the King verdict was even released. Last weekend, shows in Valparaiso, Indiana and Richmond, Virginia were also canceled with weak advances. Some of the bad news in regard to the relatively weak attendance figures at the WWF shows since WrestleMania were tempered on Friday night with a paid attendance of approximately 11,000 at Nassau Coliseum, now the company's hottest building in North America, to see a show billed as being headlined by Warrior vs. Justice. The other 2 Warrior vs. Justice shows, which turned out to be Warrior vs. Shango, although in many markets they had already gotten the advertising changed as of the weekend and posted signs in front of arenas that Justice wasn't going to be there, both in Philadelphia and in Hershey, Pennsylvania drew about 8,000 and 5,000 respectable, which are respectable numbers. With a poor first weekend back, this seems to indicate that part of the poor first weekend back was simply not enough television time to get over the matches, since Warrior's return to New York and Philadelphia did draw decently. Still, the overall direction doesn't look to be strong over the short run, although I wouldn't read anything long-term into any of this. A huge story coming out of Mexico this past week, with most details very sketchy, involves a promotional split in the EMLL, which currently employs more wrestlers, approximately 165, and runs more live shows than any wrestling promotion in the world. The promotion, which dates back to the beginnings of Lucha Libre in 1934, is now headed by Francisco Paco Alonso, a descendant of Salvador Lutteroth, the first major Lucha Libre promoter. One of his vice presidents and the person given credit for many of the most successful creative ideas in recent years, Antonio Pena, resigned this past week. It has actually been a very well-kept secret for many months that Pena's goal was to start his own promotion and run opposition to Alonso. When Alonso realized this, supposedly when the plan was revealed to Alonso by one of his bigger-name wrestlers, Alonso contacted his biggest names and gave them the ultimatum that if they didn't sign new long-term contracts with him, that they would be given their notice immediately. Apparently Alonso was able to sign Atlantis, Rayo de Jalisco Jr., Lizmark and Canadian Vampire Casanova immediately. As of press time, none of the Mexican newspapers that cover pro wrestling on a daily basis have even reported these developments, which is a testament to just how secretive everything has been to this point. Based on our reports, Mascara Sagrada, Conan and Fuerza Guerrera both gave Alonso their notice, which means they are almost sure to be among those joining Pena's group. Many other major names are expected to join them, in particular, the Midgets and Octagon, whose gimmicks were all Pena's brainchild. As of this past weekend's television, there was no sign whatsoever of any change, and in fact, the 2 most popular wrestlers in the new popularity poll were Octagon and Conan, both of whom are expected to be leaving the promotion. Our sources seem to believe Pena has the best relations with Televisa, the Mexican network which broadcasts the EMLL program, and thus he'll be able to get the popular Sunday late afternoon television slot, which airs in the United States on Galavision, which is the key over the long run. However, it is expected that Alonso will maintain exclusive promotional rights to Arena Mexico in Mexico City, the 17,500-seat building, which is the biggest grossing house in all of Mexico, with weekly Friday night shows almost always doing in excess of 10,000 fans and occasionally selling out, and Sunday shows doing around 8,000 per week. Pena is said to be looking for exclusive television contracts in other key arenas, with the lure to those buildings being that he'll rotate his television tapings around, but that in exchange for an exclusive lease, they'll be in the television rotation, which means an increase in visibility for the arena and an importance for the matches at the arena. In a story that made no press whatsoever in the United States but was a hugely covered story by all the major media in Japan, this past Thursday in Budapest, Hungary, the world governing body for amateur wrestling at its convention ruled that pro wrestlers would be eligible for the Olympic Games, starting with the 1996 Games in Atlanta. While this probably won't affect any of today's pro wrestlers, it may become applicable at some time in the future. There was a situation just a few years back in Japan where this rule was applicable. Yoshiaki Yatsu, who earned a spot as a freestyle heavyweight for Japan in the 1980 Olympics, which were boycotted, then turned pro. In 1987, he decided to try out for the 1988 Olympics in Seoul, Korea, and proceeded to win the heavyweight division in the Japanese national championships by pinning every one of his opponents. However, the International Olympic Committee shortly thereafter ruled that as a pro wrestler, he was ineligible to compete in the Olympics even though by most standards, pro wrestling isn't considered sport. Jushin Liger captured the top of the Super Junior tournament by pinning Samurai Osamu Matsuda on April 30th at Sumo Hall in Tokyo before a sellout 11,500 fans. The now annual tournament, which featured several upsets to keep the standings neck and neck throughout, came down to the last show before Sumo Hall on April 29th in Omiya, with Samurai leading the standings with 6 points, 6 wins, while Liger, Negro Casas, Pegasus Kid, Chris Benoit, and Norio Onig, last year's winner beating Liger in the finals, all had 5 points. The top 2-point getters from the round-robin matches would advance to the championship match, which would be a rare headline match on a major card. Oniga pinned England's David Finlay to clinch at least a tie for a spot in the finals. Samurai then pinned Pegasus Kid to clinch first place and guarantee his participation in the finals. It came down to Liger versus Casas, with the winner clinching a playoff match with Oniga at Sumo Hall to earn the match with Samurai in the main event. Liger, who currently holds the IWGP World Junior Heavyweight title, of course, beat Casas in Omiya and then beat Oniga in a prelim in Sumo Hall before pinning Samurai in 21-15 with a Frankensteiner off the top rope to win the tournament. Plenty of bizarre occurrences have taken place in regard to the drug, sex and all-round sleaze scandals involving Titan Sports. To give one an idea of just how sleazy this story has become, John Johnston, the reporter from A Current Affair, who co-produced the piece that aired this past Thursday night, told me the night before the piece aired that this was the single sleaziest story on all sides that he had ever done, which, considering the nature of that is no light statement. I've been covering it for 4 weeks and I'm about to go crazy. I don't see how you haven't gone crazy already, he told me. On Friday, Brooks Skalski, who produced the Now It Can Be Told segment on wrestling's sex scandal, said basically the same thing. The A Current Affair piece mainly covered items that have already previously been covered. It concentrated on steroid use in the WWF and of Hulk Hogan in particular, and claims of cocaine use by Hogan, with comments from Billy Graham, David Schultz, Billy Jack Haynes, and Bruno Sammartino. It also aired footage of the infamous two-head slaps delivered by Schultz to 2020 reporter John Stossel in the dressing room at Madison Square Garden back in December of 1984. Schultz said on the show, as he said under oath in a deposition in regard to Stossel's lawsuit, that he did so under orders from Vince McMahon. Schultz said that McMahon said to him, "David, there's a guy here doing a national TV show. He's making a joke out of the business. I want you to tear his ass out. I want you to blast him and stay in character." Schultz claimed he was fired over the incident and it was the beginning of the end of his wrestling career, although it needs to be pointed out that Schultz wrestled for the WWF for about 7 more weeks and was fired after an incident in Los Angeles involving actor Mr. McMahon's former limo driver, Jim Stewart, who appeared on television for the first time on the piece, confirmed Schultz's story, saying, "I heard Vince say, I guess, maybe I shouldn't have told Schultz to slap him," after McMahon reached a $425,000 settlement with Stossel just before the lawsuit regarding the case was going to go to trial. A 2020 cameraman a few months back confirmed almost the same wording as Schultz to me. Johnston, after being turned down in an interview request from McMahon by Steve Planamenta, tried an ambush interview by stopping him while he was in his car. But McMahon, who was being filmed and this aired, refused to talk and told them to go through proper channels for the interview, which would be through Planament, who then denied the interview request again the next day. Murray Hodgson appeared, claiming once again to have been fired as an announcer for turning down a homosexual pass by a vice president. In addition, the piece shows a letter Hodgson faxed on April 27 to Vince McMahon asking him if he could host the video and the fitness expo at the WBF Championship show in Long Beach next month, the same duties he did at the first WBF Championships in Atlantic City. Overall, the piece was about as fair as could be done under the circumstances, which included several new major allegations and curious items coming out of the woodwork over the last 2 days. The producers, Johnston and Victoria Burt, were so perplexed by the apparent hardcore lying involved on a pretty consistent basis with at least some of the parties, that they concentrated on the steroid issue, which is pretty much a slam dunk in regards to Hogan, as opposed to the sexual harassment which involves one person's word against another's, with Major League character assassinations going back and forth and really no way to prove anything. The only complaint I'd have with it, and it's a minor one, is in calling Hogan the biggest steroid abuser in the WWF. If what Schultz has claimed is correct, and doing 36 cc's per week of testosterone as the story in People magazine stated, then it would be quite believable that during that time period, early 1980s, anyone doing that could very well be the biggest steroid user in the business. But it's pretty clear that whatever Hogan may have done in recent years, it's probably not fair to say he was the biggest steroid user in this business over the past 5 or 6 years. The letter by Hodgson immediately raised a lot of questions about his credibility since he was asking for employment, albeit just for one night, from an individual he's so heavily blasted publicly. Hodgson admits to being broke and needing the money based on signing a 1-year lease for an $1,800 per month apartment upon being hired by Titan last June. However, he's vehemently insisted he's not planning on dropping his lawsuit. In fact, he claimed he'd be filing charges of sexual harassment against Patterson and Titan Sports with the EEOC in Connecticut this week to go along with his lawsuit. Hodgson's lawyer, Ed Nussbaum, told us on Thursday that he was litigating a wrongful termination suit, not a sexual harassment suit, and said he never had any intention of litigating a sexual harassment claim because things like that get said every day in every company. Nussbaum said that Hodgson's letter to Titan wouldn't hurt his case. "I'm not sure what you taste like," is something said on the job in every company daily, and it contradicts what Nussbaum told us just a week earlier about sexual harassment being a part of the case. However, McMahon's claim on Phil Donahue that Hodgson took 6 months to come forward, as reported here last week, was definitely not the case, as the second paragraph of Nussbaum's September 16, 1991 letter to McMahon, written before the Anita Hill Clarence Thomas hearing, stated, "After careful investigation of the circumstances surrounding Mr. Hodgson's employment with and termination by Titan Sports Incorporated, it is clear that he was inappropriately discharged as a direct consequence of his rejection of a homosexual advance made by a key employee of the company." The legal depositions of McMahon, Hodgson and Patterson, originally scheduled for April 25, are now scheduled for late May or early June, with the holdup being that McMahon's attorney, Jerry McDevitt, a Pennsylvania lawyer, has to be approved for a Connecticut case. Depositions in the Wayne Coleman Superstar Billy Graham lawsuit in Pennsylvania were also delayed this past week when Titan's attorneys filed other objections with the court to keep certain Titan employees and McMahon from having to be deposed. These delays come on the heels of claims by Titan of the nature of "we can't wait to get him under oath," and Titan then filing for the delays in going under oath. But if that was bizarre, what was going on behind the scenes in putting together the story was far more bizarre. This probably best explains Johnston's despair in putting it together, and the closing comments that it's hard to tell the good guys from the villains both in and out of the ring. A new personality came forward, claiming his name was Paul Baumgartner, claiming to be a former pro wrestler, to Skolsky. Baumgartner is apparently a small-time independent promoter in Ohio in reality. According to Skolsky, he claimed to have a videotape showing something that, in fairness to the person he claims it is of, we shouldn't elaborate on because I don't believe for a second he has such a video. But if he had what he claimed, it would have been enough of a story that now it can be told was going to do a follow-up pro wrestling segment based on climaxing the show with that video. In a later conversation, Baumgartner claimed to have been good friends with Rita Chatterton, the woman who has gone on 2 television shows talking about an incident involving McMahon directly. Baumgartner supposedly told Skolsky that he didn't know for certain, but that he believed Chatterton's claim. He later claimed that there were parties trying to get him to change his story to discredit Chatterton. Just a few days later, McMahon's attorney, Jerry McDevitt, comes forth to a current affair with a man named Bill Gardner, who they claimed was coming forward to say that Chatterton told him he was making up her story. A current affair interviewed the man at what was supposedly his home in Ohio, who claimed to have been a former wrestler for the WWF under Vince McMahon Sr. using the name Wolfman. There was a WWF wrestler in the late 1960s and early 1970s who used the ring name Wolfman, Willie Farkas, but I have no idea if this is the same person. He told them he was coming forward because he knew Chatterton was making up her story because she had told him personally. He also said Chatterton would never go to court on her claim because he would be there to testify for McMahon against her. He went on to say that he was coming forward because McMahon was such a great man and had done so much good for the wrestling business and done so much work for charity, and was being unfairly accused. Chatterton's attorney, Robert Wolf, said that Chatterton had never heard of nor remembers even meeting either a Bill Gardner or a Paul Baumgartner or the Wolfman, let alone saying what he claims he told her. Wolf theorized something strange based on a conversation he had a few days earlier with Skolsky, who told him that an ex-wrestler named Paul Baumgartner had claimed to her that someone was attempting to get him to discredit Chatterton. As it turns out, Gardner and Baumgartner, according to Skolsky, are the same person. His phone was disconnected the next day, and a current affair, in investigating him, found out the house he claimed was his that they interviewed him and wasn't his. They contacted McDevitt, who denied McMahon's involvement in this and said that Gardner had to disconnect his phone because he claimed he was being inundated with harassing phone messages from Chatterton. A Current Affair said they were going to show clips of their interview with Chatterton and with Gardner on the piece and also uncover what they learned about Gardner. However, that segment of the story was edited out because the piece had to be shortened because of a late addition piece to the show that evening covering the riots in Los Angeles. In addition, Lee Cole, the older brother of Tom Cole, the former and current WWF ring boy, whose claims of being sexually abused between the ages of 13 and 19 by 3 members of WWF management led to this story garnering so much media attention, asked A Current Affair if he could be interviewed for the P. He claimed he wanted to set the record straight in an interview where he would tell them a story negative to the WWF about the settlement and talk about the terms of the agreement made between his brother and the WWF. However, Cole, just before he was scheduled to leave for the interview, allegedly asked for $2,500 to do the interview and was turned down. In the first of what appears to be a series of the second round of print articles covering these scandals, a Northern New Jersey weekly entertainment magazine called Steppin' Out ran a cover story this week called WWF Exposed by Chance Hayden. The story was a question and answer with an anonymous source who claimed to have wrestled with the WWF from 1982-86 and also claimed to have been a black market steroid distributor for many of the WWF's wrestlers during that time period. The source talked about the in-ring mechanics of what goes on in the ring and the steroid and homosexuality charges. In regard to those charges, he said, "There's not one wrestler that doesn't know what goes on in the business. It's just amazing that it took so long for the public to find out. Steroid abuse is the most openly blatant thing, although sometimes homosexuality can be blatant too. I would go on record as saying that 90% of all professional wrestlers use steroids. Hulk Hogan was probably one of the biggest steroid users. I wouldn't say he took the most steroids, but he took steroids for about as long as anybody." The man claimed to have sold steroids personally to 40 to 50% of the WWF wrestlers, including Hogan, who he claimed had been using steroids for 15 to 20 years. Most sources peg Hogan's first alleged encounters at around 1977. In answering the question as to whether the promoters tell the wrestlers to take steroids, he responded, "You could say it's the wrestler's own decision, but actually they're forced into a situation where they have to take steroids because the bigger they are, the stronger they look and the better they look, the more work they get. For example, I remember Ricky Steamboat started to really get small because of being on the road 7 days a week and not being able to train tears you down. You can't stay big. And I remember it being suggested to Steamboat that he might take a little something to get bigger because he had big matches coming up, which at the time was the Wrestlemania match with Macho Man Savage. His comment about Hogan's denials on steroids were, "That's a blatant lie. I'm not going to say I condemn him because he's got a career to protect. He's just trying to protect what's his. But there's 2 ways of doing that. One way is to lie. I saw Hogan on the Arsenio Hall show and it was one big joke to anyone in the business. What a joke to go on a national talk show and blatantly lie through his teeth. He said he took steroids once for a bicep injury. That's the biggest crock of shit in the world." The source went on to say that Sergeant Slaughter doesn't take steroids, but said you don't get to look like Sid Justice or the Ultimate Warrior without them. The one comment which hurt a lot of the credibility of his story was his estimate that up to 60% of people involved in the pro wrestling business being homosexual, which is a ludicrous figure. He named Patterson and Garvin among others individually along with one WWF big-name wrestler and said about Patterson that he had a lot of power, so if you would do him a favor, he would book you on good shows where you could make big money. He named one wrestler in particular, the same name everyone mentions, as benefiting by performing favors and called him Patterson's boyfriend and said that McMahon knew about everything. When asked if it's wrong that children look up to wrestlers as their heroes, he responded, "That's a tough question. It's a joke that kids look up to these guys, because like I said, some are homosexual, some are drug users and not just steroids, there's cocaine, Percodan, pot and alcohol. I mean it's widespread, like any other professional sport. These guys are something to be laughed at, not looked up to by any kids." Aside from the ridiculously exaggerated estimate on homosexuality in the business, the source, if he wasn't a legit wrestler and dealer, had a good working knowledge of backstage gossip. However, anyone close to the business with a little experience discussing steroid use with wrestlers could also have enough knowledge to pull it off. One wrestler he mentioned specifically as a regular steroid user did regularly purchase the drugs from a New Jersey black market dealer. Another negative article in regard to the WWF, this time on a completely different subject, called Ring Around the Wrestlers, appeared in the Toronto Extra newspaper on Friday. The story is about Ken Walker, a gay man who is protesting what he claims is homophobia being perpetrated by the in-ring actions of certain WWF characters. Walker was upset after attending a match in Vancouver, DC last November, where the Bushwhackers were leading the crowd in chanting "faggots, faggots" at the Beverly Brothers and the Genius. This caused a stir in Vancouver, and apologies to Walker being written by the building and the WWF. The president of the PNE, which runs the Pacific Coliseum where the WWF holds shows, demanded a policy statement, which was sent in late January, which stated, "Please be advised that the wrestlers involved have been reprimanded for their choice of audience participation tactics, and both they and the WWF will take every possible precaution to make sure that a similar incident does not occur in the future." It was signed by Pat Patterson. Walker said, "My attitude is homophobia should be attacked wherever it is. It doesn't matter how boorish the arena, it's still wrong. Because people present at that event will internalize that homophobia to some degree, and it's yet another brick in the wall of gay hatred. The point is not to expect enlightenment from WWF. The point is that most people there are children and they're being taught to hate queers. Not only are the WWF teaching children to think of gays as swishy queers, but many of these kids will discover later that they're queer, so they're teaching them self-loathing. My concern now is that they perform throughout North America, and if they continue doing this, it means that hundreds of thousands of kids are being inundated with gay hate propaganda. So I'd really like to see people checking up on WWF in other cities." WCW brought in Dr. David Lee Black from Nashville to give a seminar on steroids to its wrestlers before the television taping this past Tuesday in Birmingham. Black went through a slideshow and talked about negative side effects, which those who don't use didn't care about and those who do use didn't want to hear. Reaction to his presentation ranged from boring to very informative. Overall, I'm told Black was honest, even to the point of admitting the shortcomings of the test in regard to measuring injectable testosterone, and honestly answered questions in regard to the clearance time needed to pass a test in regard to certain drugs, saying how water-based injectables could clear the system in 2 weeks. The overall reaction was mixed, as a lot of wrestlers claimed they felt certain so-called negative side effects, the aggressiveness in particular, were effects that they enjoyed and needed to survive and recover faster from the arduous travel and hard-bumping lifestyle, not to mention the aesthetic and marketing reasons for physique enhancement. Due to the travel schedule, the stimulant properties of the drug, which give you aggressiveness, make one more motivated to get to the gym and train harder while being on the road each day and able to perform while combating jet lag. The problem is this stimulant effect does tend to lead to alcohol or downers abuse to calm down, which is the almost inevitable drug cycle that the conditions of the business itself create. In addition, aside from the psychological up one gets from being pumped, most athletes feel joint pain lessen while on a cycle, and it aids the recovery in a profession where nightly bumps and constant pain are part of the game. Of course, there are other drugs, anti-inflammatories, which serve the same purpose. And at one point during the seminar, one wrestler basically said that if they don't mind, or even enjoy the so-called negative side effects, why should they discontinue use, and Kip Fry shot back that the possession and usage are felonies. One person described it as almost like a comedy scene from a movie when almost all the wrestlers were there for the seminar, then 10 minutes late, in a sleeveless t-shirt with his 20-plus-inch gun showing, in walks Scott Steiner. Rick Rude and Dallas Page asked the most questions, with Page saying that he found that for him, a certain steroid healed a shoulder injury better than any other drug he's ever used, and Rude being hot and adamant about it being a professional choice when one knows what the risks are because of the benefit, both in physique enhancement, particularly when it is part of a wrestler's marketability and helps him feed his family better, and also helps cope with the nightly bumps and grinds. In fact, several described Rude's demeanor toward the doctor as consistent with his heel ring persona, although admitted validity to his points. The flip side, apart from the legality of the issue, is that the drugs do work, and usage gives one a significant competitive advantage over others, thus makes it difficult for those who don't weigh the pluses and against the minuses with the same result, and don't want to use steroids to either accept lesser marketability as a result of trying to obey the law or not accept it and put up with short-term side effects they may not want and long-term that they don't even know about. It will also lead to a PR problem for an organization which devotes so much effort, particularly in Atlanta, in sending wrestlers to community centers to speak out on drugs. Inevitably, unless the problem is addressed, something will happen as far as an arrest or other publicity to show the guys aren't practicing what they are preaching, and all the PR work will be shot. There seems to be a split reaction to Kip Fry's voluntary compliance policy, with many wrestlers apparently getting off and others taking more than ever because they want to be as big as possible because they figure it's inevitable that there will be testing and they want as much size as possible. Then that time comes and there will be risks of suspensions associated with you. Due to financial reasons, John Arezzi's Pro Wrestling Spotlight radio show didn't air this past Sunday on New York's WEVD AM, but will return after a 2-week absence this coming Sunday night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. EMLL. April 24 at Arena Coliseo in Mexico City saw Los Metálicos, Oro and Plata and Bronce, win 2 straight falls from Marabunta and Enjambre and Ponzonia in a really great acrobatic match. 3 3/4 Stazzer, IGA and Koga and Super Astro beat Los Destructor, Tony Arce and Rocco Valente and Vulcano, in 17:49 3 1/4 stars. Volador and Misterioso and Angel Azteca beat Los Brazos in 14:40 with Azteca and Brazo de Oro both pinned, but Azteca got his shoulder up just before the 3 count. Il Rafael Gato Montini still counted Azteca down even though he clearly saw him raise his shoulder, but he was overruled by Roberto Rangel. 3 stars and main event saw the Untouchables, Jacques Mate and Massacre and Pierre Roth Jr. beat Canadian Vampire Casanova and Black Magic, Norman Smile, and Atlantis. Third fall saw Pierre Roth unmask Atlantis right in front of Montini, who didn't call for the automatic DQ, and Atlantis allowed himself to be pinned by Pierre Roth rather than have his identity revealed. 3 stars. Cien Cars retained his CMLL World Heavyweight title, beating Rayo de Jalisco Jr. on April 18 in Puebla by giving him a low blow behind the ref's back in the 3rd fall. Conan's rap record goes on sale on May 15 and his first scheduled concert is May 15 at Arena Pista Revolucion in Mexico City. Many new midget wrestlers are about to debut, capitalizing on the gimmicks as famous regular stars of this group: Los Gemelitos Diablos, Miniature Twin Devils, Ultimate Dragonchito, Pequeno Jacques Mate, Pequeno Massacre, and Voladorcito. Since Antonio Pena controls the midgets, one suspects that anyone whose gimmick is being copied would probably be leading toward Pena's side in the promotional split. They will be holding a CMLL World Women's Title Tournament in June at Arena Mexico. An elimination match will be held on an All-Japan Women's show between Bull Nakano and Toshio Yamada, with the winner facing the Mexican champion to determine an undisputed World Women's Champion. Nakano will be coming here over the summer on a semi-regular basis, so expect her to wind up with the belt. Aaron Grundy, Mike Shaw has been plagued by food poisoning from an intestinal infection of late. At least thus far, everything on the surface seems to be business as usual, because the May 3rd show at Arena Coliseo saw Apollo Dantes and Mano Negra and Cacho Mendoza beat Fuerza Guerrero, Apena Guy and El Egipcio and El Gran Sheik. Some of this group's wrestlers worked on top on Latin American Wrestling Association shows last month. On April 3rd in Tijuana drew 5,000, headlined by Los Brazos beating Emilio Charles Jr. and MS1 and Parata Morgan via DQ plus midgets Octagonchito and Mascarita Sagrada over Espectrito and Pequeno Pierre Roth. Samoan Cannibal, James Iono from Southern California, and Huichol, a Northern Mexico regular, beat Ultraman 2000, Amingo Ultra for FMW, and Ultra Taro. April 4th in Mexicali also drew 5,000 as Los Brazos beat Morgan and Charles and MS1, same midget match as night before, but this time with the heels winning, plus Starman, Billy Anderson, and Friar Number 1 beat the Masked Frankensteins. UWA. There was a rare joint promotion show on April 15 in Mexico City, saw Mil Mascaras and Leo Del Santo and Ultimate Dragon, Yoshihiro Asai, beating El Espanto Jr., who is said to be super, and Las Bestia Negras in the main event. Santo retained the UWA welterweight title, beating Espanto on April 18 in Mexico City. Crowds at El Torreo and throughout the area for this group have been up in recent weeks because of Bam Bam Bigelow and Andre the Giant. May 3rd at El Torreo in Naucalpan saw Andre's first match back as a babyface, teaming with Villano 3 and Enrique Vieira to win 2 straight falls from Canek and Dr. Wagner Jr. and Killer. Andre stood on Canek for 1 minute and Canek rolled out of the ring and was counted out for the first fall. With a 3-on-2 face advantage, the second fall was short with simultaneous pins of 3 on Killer and Vieira on Wagner while Canek was being carried out on a stretcher. But they did another quick double turn as Andre knocked Canek off the stretcher and kept beating on him once again, so after 1 week, Andre is back as a heel and Canek as a face. Also Fishman and Canadian Express, Phil Layson aka Dan Crawford in Doug Furnace, drew with Gran Hamada and Los Cowboys, Silver King and El Texano, in the best match on the card. The Death Missionaries, Negro Navarro and El Signo and Black Power 2, beat Phantasma and Celestial and Villano. El Ojo de Tigre and El Hijo de Superzin and Moctezuma debuted as a trio in El Torreo, beating Cajozai and Babyface and El Engendro, while the opener saw Lobo Rubio and Hijo del Diablo and Falcon beat Katana and Kendo Star and Alcon 78 via DQ. New Japan. The tour with the Junior Heavyweight Tournament ended on May 1st before a full house of 7,500 at the new arena in Chiba, with Ricky Choshu retaining his IWGP title in the main event, pinning Scott Norton with a series of lariats in 10:31. Bam Bam Bigelow and Big Van Vader retained the IWGP Tag Team titles, beating Keiji Muto and Hiroshi Hazi in 2040 when Vader pinned Hazi using Hazi's own Soviet judo suplex called a urinage and a big splat. Shiro Koshinaka knocked out Masashi Aoyagi in the Wrestling vs. Karate Mixed match in 12:01. Tony Halme pinned Shinya Hashimoto after a right cross knockout punch in 11:18. The Raging Staff, Hiro Saito and Tatsutoshi Goto and Super Strong Machine, beat Takayuki Iizuka and Akira Nagami and Masa Chono when Nagami was pinned due to outside interference from Norio Onik. Pegasus Kid and Jushin Liger beat Negro Casas and Samurai when Kid pinned Casas. Osamu Kido and Kengo Kimura beat Bad News Allen and Masanobu Kurisu. Koji Kanemoto pinned Eddie Guerrero and Michiyoshi Yamamoto pinned Osamu Nishimura. Bigelow and Vader are tentatively scheduled to defend the IWGP Tag Belts on June 26 at Budokan Hall in Tokyo against Rick and Scott Steiner, who are coming in for one night. April 30 at Tokyo Sumo Hall drew a sellout 11,500 as Liger pinned Samurai to win the tournament, in what was said to have been a super match. Bigelow and Vader beat Muto and Chono when Bigelow pinned Chono with a big splash in 11:12. Hashimoto and Chashu beat Halme and Norton when Hashimoto pinned Halme in 13:5. Kunyaki Kobayashi pinned Akitoshi Saito in a wrestler vs. karate match. Saito and Goto and Machine beat Hazi and Iizuka and Nagami. Liger pinned Oniga. David Finlay and Pegasus Kid beat Casas, and Guerrero and Kanemoto pinned Scorpio. There is some kind of an angle associated with the two karate versus wrestling matches on the two big shows. I believe there is a sign which would be similar to one of those symbolic cups that college football teams that have one major big game each year against each other play for possession, and that Kobayashi won the sign beating Akitoshi Saito and Koshinaka kept it the next night against Aoyagi, who is the head of the karate school, and was like the master trying to get back the sai. Koshinaka gave the sign to Chashu as a symbol that the wrestlers beat the karate guys. Aoyagi claimed they would eventually beat the wrestlers to get the sign back. Kanemoto will work once again as Tiger Mask on the May 17th big show in Osaka Castle Hall, 14,000 seats, against Pegasus Kid. Also on the card will be Liger vs. Samurai once again, this time for the IWGP Junior Heavyweight title, Chashu vs. Hashimoto for the IWGP title, Vader vs. Halme. Senator Antonio Inoki returns teaming with Hazi against Rambo from Europe and Brad Rheingans, Chono vs. Mashi, Akira Nagami vs. Brad Armstrong and several other matches. April 29th at the Omiya Skate Center saw Machine and Goto beat Chashu and Hazi when Machine pinned Chashu in 12:46, Hashimoto and Muto beat Nagami and Iizuka when Hashimoto pinned Iizuka in 23:07, Norton and Halme beat Bigelow and Larry Cameron, Hiro Saito pinned Chono in a major upset when the rest of the Raging Staff interfere, Liger pinned Casas, Samurai pinned Pegasus Kid, Oniga pinned Finlay and Guerrero pinned Scorpio. A special show on April 27th in Shimabara with no foreign wrestlers saw Chono and Hashimoto and Muto beat Chashu and Kido and Kimura in the main event when Chono made Kido submit to the STF. Kobayashi and Koshinaka upset Hazi and Nagami when Kobayashi pinned Nagami with the Fisherman Suplex. Samurai and Iizuka beat Liger and Kanemoto and Scorpio pinned Yamamoto. SWS. Coming to Japan for the June 18th to June 22nd tour will be the Berserker, who they are pushing like crazy as a Bruiser Brody clone, Rick Martel, Chavo Guerrero and Guerrero del Futuro from Mexico. Headline matches on tour will be May 18th in Fukui with Genichiro Tenryu and Ashura Hara and Takashi Ishikawa vs. Yoshiaki Yatsu and King Haku and Kendo Nagasaki, George Takano and Naoki Sano vs. Martel and Guerrero and Berserker vs. Kenichi Oya. May 19th in Toyama has Tenryu and Hara and Samson Fuyuki vs. Shinichi Nakano and Tatsumi Kitahara and Fumihiro Niikura, Haku and Yatsu vs. Takano Brothers, and Berserker vs. Nagasaki. May 20th in Kanazawa has Tenryu and Hara and Ultimate Dragon vs. Berserker and Haku and Guerrero del Futuro in what should prove to be the ultimate in styles clashing. I mean, can you imagine Ultimate Dragon at 5'6.5" and 170 pounds against Berserker or Haku? Or Guerrero del Futuro and against Tenryu or Hara? Also Sano vs. Martel for the SWS Junior Heavyweight title in Nagasaki and Yatsu vs. Takano Brothers. Tour ends May 22nd at Korakuen Hall in Tokyo with Tenryu and Fuyuki vs. Nakano and Kitahara, Sano vs. Guerrero for the SLUS Junior Heavyweight title, Haku and Yatsu and Nagasaki vs. Takano Brothers, and Apollo Sugawara and Berserker vs. Martel. Other Japan notes. FMW cancelled its shows scheduled for next week in both Tijuana and Los Angeles. FMW ran a successful show on May 2nd at the Hiroshima Sun Plaza Arena drawing a sellout 5,952, which is more than New Japan drew in the same building of late, headlined by a no-rope barbed wire match with Atsushi Onita beating the Sheik via submission with a half-crab in 440 wa. In other results, Tarzan Goto and Samba Asako beat Sabu and Horace Boulder, Mark Balia the real-life nephew of Hulk Hogan and the Starman Billy Anderson, and Centurion Tim Patterson, beat Mr. Ganasuke and the Shooter. May 3rd, in an outdoor show in Osaka, drew 4,015 for a street fight tornado tag match as Onita and Goto and Ganasuke beat Sabu and Boulder and Centurion. Asako and Riki Fuji beat Sheik and Starman when Asako pinned Starman in 3:58, but after the match Sheik threw fire in Asako's eye. May 1st, in Higashi, Osaka, drew a sellout 2,458 as Boulder and Sabu and Sheik beat Shooter and Goto and Onita. Ganasuke pinned Centurion and Fuji pinned Starman. April 30th, in Fukui, drew a sellout 3,020 as Onita and Asako and Shooter won a street fight, beating Starman and Centurion and Boulder. Sheik and Sabu beat Ganasuke and Goto. April 29th, in Shineken, saw Onita and Ganasuke beat Boulder and Centurion. Sheik and Sabu beat Goto and Shooter, and Asako pinned Starman. April 27th, in Yokkaichi, saw Onita and Asako and Shooter beat Boulder and Centurion and Starman. Goto pinned Sabu and Sheik pinned Ganasuke in 2:07. Only big show this coming week will be on May 6th, with the ring surrounded by fire match with Sheik and Sabu vs Onita and Goto. All Japan Women on April 29th in Toto was headlined by Toshio Yamada and Manami Toyota beating Yumiko Hata and Kyoko Inoue. Asia Kong and Bison Kimura beat Debbie Malenko and Seiki Hasegawa. Mariko Yoshida won the Japanese women's title, beating Takako Inoue in 17:60. Suzuka Minami and Mima Shimoda beat Bat Yoshinaga, and Tomoko Watanabe and Kim Terisu became the Japanese junior champion by winning a preliminary girls tournament. Some of the Wrestlemania matches from April 25th aired on television on May 4th. Big Titan missed his scheduled FMW tour. JWP has started training 5 new girls ranging in age from 16 to 23. Akira Maeda is said to have signed 11 new fighters from Bulgaria, including 2 contenders for spots in the 1992 Olympics. Hank Newman, who headlines the May 16th show against Maeda, is 36 years old and another protege of Chris Dolman. His 3rd place in the world finish in judo, which we listed last week as being from last year, was actually from 1979. USWA. April 27th, in Memphis, saw Moondog Spot go to a double disqualification with Larry Arch. Kat Garrett pinned the intern. Psycho pinned Tony Anthony in a no disqualification match. Lauren Davenport, Beverly Hampton, regained the USWA women's title, beating Dirty White Girl K, the man of the 90s, Warren Bianchi, and Davenport beat Tony Falk and Miss Jennifer. The match for the held-up Southern Heavyweight title with Brian Christopher against Tom Pritchard wound up with Christopher winning by using a chain. Eddie Marlin, who has been suspended as promoter because he interfered in the match the previous week, was sitting at ringside in the front row and jumped into the ring, and he and Pritchard managed to get the chain away to show the ref. Acting Commissioner Guy Coffey ruled that since Marlin wasn't supposed to be at ringside and he was the one who exposed Christopher using the chain, they had no choice but to hold the titles up for another week. The main event saw all 3 Moondogs, Fike and Spot and Cujo, teaming with manager Richard Lee to beat Jerry Lawler and Jeff Jarrett, and Moondog Hunter Charlie Trapper and Big Black Dog hit Black Dog over the head with a bone and broke it and pinned him. Lee was injured again, wearing a neck brace on television Saturday from a pile driver in the match. On television Saturday, Lawler wrestled the man of the 90s. Davenport interfered for the DQ, but Lawler got a hold of her, hiked up her skirt and spanked her. There's more to that one than meets the eye. Nurse Cratchit then interfered, but Lawler spanked her as well. Psycho then interfered as well, but Lawler beat him up as well. Charlie Trapper, or Moondog Hunter, used to work Independence as J.R. Hogg. May 4th, in Memphis, as Dirty White Girl Kim vs. Cratchit, Arch and Garrett vs. the Power Twins. From New York, Man of 90s vs. Falk, with the winner getting the loser's valet for 1 week. Psycho vs. Tony Anthony in a loser leaves town match, with Anthony heading to Smoky Mountain Wrestler. Is the favorite to lose. Black Dog vs. Moondog Spot. Christopher vs. Pritchard for the belt-up Southern title. Moondog Spike and Cujo vs. Jarrett and Trapper for the USWA tag team titles, and Kimala vs. Lawler for the USWA title. Lawler all but guaranteed he would win the title in his interview. Falk wrestled Psycho on television, which wound up with Jennifer, Cratchit and Davenport all interfering until Kim and Tony Anthony made the save. They aired another interview with a blind Eric Embry talking about coming back to get revenge on the Moondogs. Global. This group seems to have wound down to being just another local weekly independent show in the Dallas market with the financial cutbacks. May 1st, at the Dallas Sportatorium, drew a little less than 350 fans as Johnny Mantel returned and pinned Brian Henning. Bill Irwin drew with Stacy Porto, who formerly worked here and in Puerto Rico as Alex Porto, although Stacy is his real first name. The Connection, John Tatum and Rod Pry, no longer being called California Connection, beat Ed Robinson and Chris Germany. Sam Houston retained the GWF television title against the Viper in a belt versus mask match. They went to a time limit draw originally, and the ref told Viper that he had to unmask because the contract stated he'd unmask if he didn't win the title. Viper protested and asked for 5 more minutes. Houston agreed, and in the first move of the restarted match, Houston tried a bulldog, was shoved off, but held onto the mask and revealed Viper as Mike Davis. Also, the Ebony Experience, a pair of newcomers who are said to be impressive based out of Houston, beat Henning and Germany. Irwin pinned Sean Summers in a match where Johnny Mantell came to ringside to heckle and start a program with Irwin. Ebony Experience beat Stevens and Porto. Maniac Mike Davis without the Viper getup pinned Germany. Mantell pinned Robinson, and Stephen Dane and Gary Young became the new GWF Tag Team Champions, beating Terry Sims and Scott Putski for the held-up belts. Finish saw Dane pin Sims after Skander Akbar hit Sims with a loaded sock. The suspicion from here is that the crowd will continue to drop if they continue television nights being virtually in all squash format. Chaz and Tug Taylor both drove in from Houston for the show, only to be told there was no room on the card for them. Bruce Pritchard has been contacted about returning as a manager, but no defined role has been given. Lineup for the May 8th Dallas show is scheduled as being headlined by Eddie Gilbert defending the North American title against Mantell. That's the only match being advertised, and after his outburst last week, few expect Gilbert to actually be there. One suspects Mantell will be awarded the title on a forfeit and become the group's top heel. Also announced for the show are the Renegade Warriors, Mark and Chris Youngblood, Iceman King Parsons, probably as a heel, Billy Joe Travis, and Danny Davis. There has been talk the past week that ESPN is interested in reviving the old Tapes Legends format so they'll have access to bigger name stars for its afternoon time slot. Oregon. The May 2nd card in Portland drew about 200 fans and was a better show than usual because of the presence of a Japanese photographer who everyone was trying to show off for. The grappler came out wearing a title belt, since he's going to Japan billed as Pacific Northwest champion, even though in this territory C.W. Bergstrom now holds the strap, and wrestled Bart Sawyer in a Total Japan-style match with both men working as baby faces. Surprisingly, Sawyer pinned grappler and the two hugged each other after the match. John Rambo drew with Jesse Barr, with Barr doing more wrestling than he's done in recent memory. Ron and Don Harris came out with expensive new ring outfits and went to a double countout against Al Madrill and Mike Miller. Brickhouse Brown pinned Buddy Rose in a match where if Rose lost, he'd have to shine Brown's shoes. Before Rose shined Brown's shoes, Colonel De Beers interfered and he and Rose pummeled Brown. You knew somebody would do this, and Portland did it first department. After destroying Brown, De Beers grabbed the house mic and said, "We're the LAPD and you're Rodney King," which got no crowd reaction except dead silence and a few groans, since the incident didn't get heat and because of that came off as pathetic. Steve Dahl pinned De Beers in the main event. Bergstrom did win the title last week, since we had some question about it in last week's issue. It's interesting because there is something of a weird split involved in the promotion. They have a cable access show on in Portland which is taped from Vancouver, Washington, but at the Portland cards they never mention the show. Sandy Barr runs Vancouver while Don Owen runs Portland, and what goes on in one building isn't acknowledged in the other. For instance, even though Bergstrom is Northwest champ in Vancouver, it not only isn't acknowledged in Portland, but Bergstrom is still nothing more than a jobber there. The Harris feud with Madrill and Miller in Portland doesn't exist in Vancouver. Another wrestling tradition bit the dust as the weekly Friday night cards at the Lane County Fairgrounds in Eugene are no more due to weak attendance, so Owen himself is only running Portland, and the rest of the work the guys get is from Barr. Bergstrom and Relampago Leon, who lives in the Portland area but doesn't wrestle anymore locally, are headed to South Africa. Moondog Moretti was said to have been invited, as was Billy Jack Haynes, however Haynes turned it down because he's trying to train to become a boxer. A newcomer in Vancouver has been Mad Bull Dozier, Richie Magnet. Here and there. Iqua on April 30th in Tampa saw Alan Iron Eagle beat El Bandito, Sandy Beach pinned Tommy Starr, Dennis Brown pinned Coconut Man, Al Perez beat Hurricane Walker, Robert Fuller beat Pat Tanaka via DQ, and Star Riders DDQ a newcomer tag team whose name I didn't get. Eddie Mansfield will be running a show on May 16th in Jacksonville at the Naval Base, the night before the WCW pay-per-view show for those coming in from out of town, headlined by Blackjack Mulligan vs. Black Bart for the IWF title and a return match from last year with Raoul Mott, who was a big name in California in the early 1970s and the first practitioner of the Frankensteiner, then known as the Mata Roll, in the United States, versus the Possessor, formerly Nasty Ned Brady. Mata and Brady had a match on an indie show in Tampa the night before WCW St. Pete pay-per-view, which was a pretty memorable match. On May 2nd in Tamaqua, Pennsylvania saw Max Thrasher double count out with Brick Bronski, AWF champ Kirk Dredd pinned Cheetah Kid, Ted Petty, AC Golden Mark Freer, pinned Ricky Lee, and Bob Backlund pinned Paul Orndorff with one of those double pin finishes, but Backlund just bridging before the 3 count in what was said to have been a good match. Buck Robley's April 27th show in New Orleans saw Buddy Landell beat Dusty Wolf, Robert Gibson pinned Nasty Massey, Ron Primetime Powers pinned Steve Wild Thing Ray, Tim Horner and Butch Reed beat Bob Orton and Manny Fernandez, and Orndorff pinned Greg Valentine. May 2nd in Chamaco, Puerto Rico saw El Exotico and Randy Rhoads over Lale and Rockin' Rebel. Muhammad Hussein Lou Fabiano pinned Cyclone Salvadorino. Heartbreaker Adonis, Frankie Lancaster pinned El Corsario. WWC champion Carlitos Colon beat Dick Murdoch in a bull rope match. Miguelito Perez beat Fidel Sierra. David Cannell aka David Sierra by a DQ, and Hussein interfered. Ron Starr and Doug Masters retained the WWC tag team titles, going to a DDQ with Rex King and Ricky Santana, and Invader No. 1 won a battle royal by throwing out Colon to win. Invader and Colon, both of whom are still faces, brawled all over the building after the match was over. Dennis Corluzzo is trying to sign an Atsushi Onita vs. Terry Funk match for the Philadelphia area for the summer, but isn't close to pulling it off. Peach State Wrestling drew 200 on May 2nd in Rome, Georgia, headlined by Mr. Atlanta, Tony Zane, beating Paul Golden due to outside interference by the Peachtree Assassin. MAWA on April 29th in Mesquite, Texas drew 141, headlined by California Stud, Rod Price, and Carl Cole DDQ the Stomper, Gary Vines, and Eric Fontaine. May 6th headliner is Stud vs. Stomper and Fontaine in a handicap match. Big D Pro Wrestling drew 121 in Dallas at the Rocket Palace on May 3rd, headlined by Booker John Tatum and Price and Jimmy James, as faces over Stephen Dane and Sean Stevens and Mr. Outrageous, Ray Evans under a mask, managed by Freddie Fargo when Fargo's power hit Outrageous. May 10th has Stevens vs. Tatum for the group's title, Price vs. Billy Joe Travis, Gary Young vs. Action Jackson, and Dane vs. King Parsons. April 17th in Fort Dutchins, Utah drew 525 as Mr. Outrageous beat Billy Anderson in what was billed as an IWAIC title match. Samoan Prince and Scott Cole and Anderson and Satindal beat Outrageous, and Larry Ludden and Don Juan and Sabrina Fury in a mixed match, and Coco were pinned Honky Tonk Man. Same crew drew 700 on April 18th in Grand Junction, Utah, with Were beat Honky Tonk Man via DQ on top. John McAdam and Cody Boyne's first UWC show on May 1st in Nashua, New Hampshire drew 210 fans using local wrestlers. Several readers reported being shocked at the overall quality of the workers, in particular Flying Bill Wilcox. I'm told the show had 2 3-stars matches, and Wilcox vs. Freight Train Fulton at 3 1/2 stars. Next show is May 15th with Wilcox vs. Playboy Vince Apollo and Maverick Sykes vs. Freight Train Fulton in semifinal matches of the UCW title tournament. April 24th at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh drew 120 for a show which included Shane Douglas and was headlined by Charlie Fulton beat Dominic DeNucci, yes, that Dominic DeNucci. Cliff Bartz and Gary Hathaway have a show on May 17th in Barrie, Vermont with Hercules, The Barbarian, Jim Neidhart, Dino Bravo, Marty Jannetty, and Flying Bill Wilcox. April 23rd at the Indian Bingo Parlor in Spartanburg, South Carolina saw Jay Eagle and Wahoo McDaniel over Warlock and Grim Reaper, and Wahoo won a battle royal. Australian promoter Bob Blassie taped 6 shows with local wrestlers for Sky Channel, and Sky Channel folks agreed for another 24-show run starting in July. Australian tag champs Wayne Pickford and Ken Dunlop will be touring England in July/August. This is what the mini bio of Sam Mushnick on his induction into the Missouri Sports Hall of Fame stated: a former sports writer who became promoter extraordinaire, president of the National Wrestling Alliance, brought to life a wisdom which, naturally, media members obviously favor. Said Sam, next to medicine, I rank journalism second among professions because it keeps the rest of us honest. Mushnick's own honesty held together the NWA in his almost 30 years as president because mat operators wouldn't trust each other. Shortly after Mushnick ended 37 years as promoter, New Year's Day 1982, the local organization he built and national body began to crumble. Although acknowledging need then for theatrics for box office purposes, Honoree scoffs at current depths of circus wrestling. Russian-born, St. Louis reared graduate of Central High, frustrated writer gave up $37.50 weekly post office check in 1926 for only $20 with St. Louis Times. Covered big league baseball on and off until paper folded in the summer of 1932, traveling with Cards 1920 pennant winners, 1931 world champions. Became PR successor to promoter Tom Pax, later competed with and conquered Old Boss, for whom he assumes typical sentimental memories. Charitable World War II veteran, taking over actively as promoter in late 1945, included Legion Post in receipts, Riley aware that he had been kicked upstairs when newspaper folded, but wishing it hadn't been so. South Atlantic Pro Wrestling drew 100 in Garner, North Carolina on May 2nd as tag champs Ringlords beat Tommy Gunn and Chaz Rocco via DQ. Sapper champ Neil Superior pinned Nicky Airhawks, the Patriot. Till Wilkes pinned Ringlord Rick Slagle. Danby pinned Peggy Lee Leather, and Patriot won an 11-man battle royal. Ohio Championship Wrestling has a show May 9th in Presleen, Ohio with Charlie Fulton, Ron Cumberledge, Barry Hardy, and Mike Sharp. Anthony Durante and Gary Wolfe, the Mad Bull Busters in Japan, are promoting a show on June 12th at St. Joe High in Hamilton, New Jersey, with them headlining against the Samoans, Afa and Samu. Smoky Mountain Wrestling on May 17th in Beckley, West Virginia is billing Killer Kyle, Mark Kyle, and Joe Kazana versus the Batten Twins, Bob Holly, who has since quit wrestling, versus Dixie Dynamite, Scott Armstrong, Tim Horner versus Buddy Landell, Robert Gibson versus Jimmy Golden, Brian Lee versus Tony Anthony, managed by Ron Wright with Bob Armstrong as guest referee, and the Heavenly Bodies, Tom Pritchard and Stan Lane, managed by Jim Cornette versus Bobby and Jackie Fulton, who will be in Japan, so suspect it'll be Davey and Johnny Rich. North Georgia Wrestling had a television taping May 3rd in Alpharetta, Georgia with Randy Rose, Big Bully Bizich and Steve Lawler as the biggest names. Wrestler Johnny Dollar changed his name to Terry Alexander Golden, combining Hulk Hogan's original ring names, Terry Boulder and Sterling Golden. The Magnificent One, Glenn Gilbernetti, won a non-title match from Georgia champ Mike Kurovich due to Bizich's interference, but in a return match, Kurovich retained the title via pin. Scott Hudson, Stephen DeTruth and Joel Deaton did the commentary. Deaton is still on the bend after suffering a herniated disc on his last Japan tour. WWF Superstars was taped on April 29th in Syracuse, New York before about 4,500 fans. The Roadblock, Joe DeQuisto, got a tryout and did a job for Jim Brunzell. Himala debuted managed by Harvey Whippleman and Kim Chi, who was either Paul Diamond or Steve Lombardi, not sure which. Crush pinned Kato, Ric Flair pinned Sergeant Slaughter when the Mountie interfered and zapped Sarge with his new more powerful zapper, and Sarge did a stretcher job. A jobber was in the ring waiting for a match with Papa Shango, who is getting the top heel push right now with Sid Justice AWOL. And suddenly all the lights in the arena went out. When the lights came on, the jobber's boots were on fire and the match never took place. The Warrior Shango angle went like this. Warrior had a match scheduled against Brian Knobbs of the Nasty Boys. Before the match, both Nasty Boys attacked Warrior and stole his wristband before Warrior made his own save and won the match. Shango got the wristband and put a curse on it, and Warrior started selling like his wrist was hurt. Shango ends up attacking Warrior, who's a stretcher job. The convict, Kevin Waycalls aka Kevin Kelly, wearing huge lifts in his boots to make him look 6'8", attacked Big Boss Man, handcuffing him to the ropes and beating him with his nightstick for more than 6 minutes, and a very brutal angle that got a lot of heat, ending in the third babyface stretcher job on the same Shawn Michaels beat Bret Hart via countout, taped for prime time. Undertaker pinned Berserker, No Cameras, Legion of Doom and Natural Disasters beat Nasty Boys and Money Incorporated when Quake pinned Sags, and Paul Ellering beat up Jimmy Hart after the match. Randy Savage beat Ric Flair via DQ when Mr. Perfect interfered, and Warrior pinned Shango in 27 seconds. Piper did pit segments with Brooklyn Brawler, probably not taped, a really bad segment until Piper hit Brawler over the head with the ring bell, and Shawn Michaels and Sherry taped. The gimmick is they have an audience that Piper plays to, and whenever the heel guest lies, the crowd is supposed to chant pits at them. A woman came out of the audience when Michaels said no woman could resist him, but instead of kissing Michaels, the woman was wearing a Piper t-shirt and kissed Piper. Wrestling Challenge was taped on April 28th in Niagara Falls before 5,000 fans, with Roadblock doing another job for Brunzell in a tryout. Roadblock looked terrible. Ted DiBiase vs. Earthquake ended with DiBiase trying to do the walkout but was caught in the aisle by Typhoon, and IRS showed up and ended up IRS interfering for the DQ. Owen Hart and Coco were teamed up as High Energy. Bret Hart pinned Michaels when Sherry's interference backfired in an OK. Slaughter beat Kato, Beverly Brothers beat Bushwhackers and continued to beat on them afterwards until Legion of Doom made the save. Savage did another interview talking about Ric Flair and new photos. Undertaker pinned Berserker, Natural Disasters and Legion of Doom beat Nasty Boys and Money Incorporated. Bret Hart did an interview dedicating the IC belt to his father on his father's 76th birthday. Piper did basically the same pit as he did the next night with Shawn Michaels. Slaughter did an interview for Memorial Day weekend and talked about the stretcher job that he did for Mountie, which wasn't even taped until the next day, and nobody in the building had a clue as to what he was talking about. Warrior pinned Shango and Savage beat Flair via DQ when Perfect interfered. April 30th in Las Vegas drew a padded 2,300 as Brunzell pinned Bob Bradley 1/2 of 1 star, Tatanka pinned Colonel Mustafa dud, Undertaker pinned Berserker dud, Natural Disasters beat Money Incorporated with the same walkout core finish as Mania dud, Virgil pinned Skinner 1/2 of 1 star, Slaughter pinned Mountie when Jimmy Hart's interference backfired 1/2 of 1 star, and Savage pinned Flair in 10 minutes with an elbow off the top rope that missed by a foot 1 1/2 star. Brunzell has replaced Kerry Von Erich on all house shows since last Sunday. No word on what that's all about. Legion of Doom Animal is being sued as a result of a 1989 bar fight at the Marketplace Bar in Baltimore, according to an article in Sunday's Baltimore Sun. The lawsuit contends Animal beat bar patron Ralph E. Cloetzel in a manner that was extreme, outrageous, and beyond the bounds of decency in society. The suit claims the wrestler is alleged to have beaten Cloetzel after he made an unfavorable remark about wrestlers and the wrestling industry. Cloetzel denies making the remark. The plaintiff claims he had his head smashed against a glass case as he was being thrown out of the bar by bouncers. He's suing Animal for $400,000 and the bar for $250,000, along with the bar's general manager for swearing out an arrest warrant for destruction of property related to the smashing of the glass case. The criminal charges were later dropped. The plaintiff's attorney, Larry Poland, who identified the defendant in the suit as Animal Legion of Doom, wouldn't answer questions relating to the incident, other than to say he was unable to determine Animal's real name. The WWF was served with the court papers on Saturday. Steve Plenamenta, who wouldn't divulge Animal's real name, was interviewed saying, "He and Hawk are both terrific, they're great guys. People love them." As a matter of fact, today they're up in New York speaking to kids at a school about drugs and the DARE program. All American did a 2.5 rating on April 26, Primetime a 2.4 on April 27, while Body Stars did another 0.7 on April 25. Before the Body Star show, there is a line that notes the time for the show is being paid for by Titan Sports Incorporated. In other words, it's not regular programming for the USA Network but simply time being paid for, which means the low ratings may not be a factor in whether or not the show gets cancelled. British Bulldog missed all weekend shows to sell his neck injury angle from television, and was replaced by Jim Duggan. May 3rd in Hershey, Pennsylvania drew 5,000 as Crush pinned Kato, Nasty Boys beat Owen Hart and Jim Powers, Duggan beat Repo Man via DQ, Warrior pinned Shango, Rick Martel pinned Tito Santana, Bret Hart pinned Michaels, best match on card, and Legion of Doom beat Beverly Brothers. May 2nd in Philadelphia drew 8,000 and May 1st at the Nassau Coliseum drew 11,000 with all the same results. WCW. Rick and Scott Steiner won the WCW Tag Team titles on May 3rd in Chicago in a cage match from Arnold Anderson and Bobby Eaton. After a few more weeks, expect Anderson and Eaton to stop teaming together, with Anderson being moved into a single slot as an eventual challenger for Sting and Eaton forming a tag team with Steve Austin. Rick Rude beat Dustin Rhodes in the finals of the Nintendo Top 10 Challenge Tournament at the television taping May 1st in St. Petersburg that airs on Worldwide Wrestling. A decision will be made probably by the end of the week for the site of the Great American Bash pay-per-view show on July 12. The show, at press time, is still scheduled for the Philadelphia Civic Center, but there are labor problems in that city and a threat is being made to go on strike on July 1. Because of all the union help needed in setting up the building for a major pay-per-view show, a strike would be a disaster. Therefore, if the labor dispute isn't settled within a week or so, expect the Bash, which will contain the final 3 rounds of the NWA Tag Team Tournament, and probably be headlined by Sting vs. Big Van Vader, to be moved to Albany, Georgia. Sting appeared on Mike Tenney's Wrestling Insider's radio show on April 25 and came off really well. It appears the idea of bringing in Scott Norton and Bam Bam Bigelow from Japan has been dropped. Jake Roberts is virtually a definite in coming in, the only question being how soon. Newcomer the Super Invader Hercules started at television in St. Pete, managed by Harley Race, and is being given a major push. He looked the same as he looked as Hercules. Gone. And speaking of WCW Saturday Night, the show drew a 2.1 rating on April 25 with Bill Fralick a guest host, while Main Event did a 2.0 and Power Hour a 1.7 the same weekend. Speaking of WCW Saturday Night, aren't you all glad to know that The Wonder Years has been renewed for a 6th season? There is no truth to the rumor that WCW will be selling badges to fans at the matches, saying I stayed awake for the entire Arnold Anderson vs. Big Josh match while Jason Hervey did commentary. April 28 in Birmingham drew 2,500 for WCW Pro tapings as Barry Windham and Dustin Rhodes beat Larry Zbyszko and Bobby Eaton, with Zbyszko and Paul E. dangerously arguing big time after the match and the fans popping big for Zbyszko as a face. Abdullah the Butcher returned and teamed with Cactus Jack. Diamond Stud Scott Hall returned to set up a program with Dustin Rhodes. It appears Stud will wind up in the Dangerous Alliance after Zbyszko does his thing. Rick Steamboat and Nikita Koloff are being pushed on television as a tag team to lead up to the tournament. Todd Champion, PN News, Thomas Rich and Al Gigante are all history among others. Nikita Koloff pinned Eaton clean with the sickle. Freebirds beat Greg Valentine and Taylor Made Man in a non-title match. Later, Hayes vs. Valentine saw Garvin and Taylor come out, and Garvin's interference saw Hayes pin Valentine, but after the heels did a number on the faces, with Valentine putting Hayes in the figure 4 while Taylor splashed onto Hay. Taylor vs. Garvin later in the show, with Hayes and Valentine coming to ringside and selling his injured knee like crazy, but Taylor wound up winning. May 1st, worldwide television taping in St. Petersburg drew a padded 4,500. In the top 10 challenge, Steve Austin beat Ron Simmons via DQ 2 stars when the ref caught Simmons using a chair that Austin had brought in. Rhodes pinned Zbyszko in a match where Zbyszko and Medusa kept arguing 2 1/4 stars. Austin drew Steamboat to eliminate both of them 1 3/4 star. Super Invader debuted using the powerbomb as a finisher and winning a few handicap matches. Rude pinned Rhodes to win the Nintendo Top 10 Challenge in a super match 4 stars. Steiners beat Anderson and Eaton via DQ in a dark match when the heels used the phone 2 3/4 stars. Koloff pinned Mr. Hughes 2 stars. Scotty Flamingo pinned Brad Armstrong 1 star. Steamboat and Koloff beat Anderson and Zbyszko via DQ in 5 minutes when Eaton interfered 1 1/2 star. Johnny B. Bad pinned Flamingo when JT Southern's interference backfired 1 1/4 star. Steamboat and Koloff beat Austin and Anderson in a match where Zbyszko interfered, but it backfired and cost them the match and dangerously, and Zbyszko argued. Then Anderson and Zbyszko argued, with Austin having to break it up, and the crowd popping real big for Zbyszko as a face 2 1/2 stars. And in a dark main event, Steamboat beat Rude in a cage match via DQ, and Anderson and Austin did a run-in. The highlight of the match was Steamboat doing a superplex on Rude off the top of the cage. 3 stars. Rumor has it that Precious will be returning to manage Garvin. Bob Cook and Joe Cruz are trained together at Jody Hamilton's school in Lovejoy, Georgia, to be a mid-level heel masked tag team. May 2nd in Saginaw drew $2,618,000 as Garvin pinned Mike Graham 1/2 of 1 star, Valentine pinned Marcus Bagwell 1 star, Tom Zank pinned Hughes 1/2 of 1 star, Bennett pinned Tracy Smothers 1 star. Steiners beat Anderson and Eaton via DQ when Anderson hit Scott with the phone 3 1/4 star. Simmons pinned Taylor 1 star, Rhodes and Wyndham beat Zbyszko and Diamond Dallas Page 2 stars, Rude beat Steamboat via DQ in 25 minutes 3 1/4 stars. Medusa was great at ringside in getting heat. Bout started slow but turned into a great match. And in the main event, Koloff pinned Austin after an interminable 18:36 dud. April 30th in West Palm Beach drew 400 as Page pinned Bagwell, Bad pinned Smothers 2 1/4 stars, Rhodes pinned Hughes 2 1/2 stars, Taylor and Valentine beat Freebirds via DQ 1 star, Wyndham pinned Zbyszko 3 stars, Steiners beat Anderson and Eaton in a non-title match 1 star, clowning and going through the motions match, and Steamboat and Koloff beat Rude and Austin 2 1/2 stars. Judging from Saturday's TV show, we'll be seeing a return of the Bull drop-in with Dusty Rhodes and Jason Hervey. Hey, do you know that The Wonder Years has been renewed for its 6th season? Upcoming guest hosts for WCW Saturday night include Dave Casper, the former All-Pro tight end with the old Oakland Raiders, and Randy Rickman of the Headbangers Ball on MTV. Lightning Kid Sean Waltman is getting a tryout at the May 11th television taping in Center Stage. Seiji Sakaguchi and Masa Saito are coming to the U.S. this week to work on deals. Brian Pillman is scheduled to return on May 10th in Atlanta. Complete updated lineup for the May 17th pay-per-view show out of Jacksonville has Southern vs. Van Hammer, Bad vs. Smothers, Simmons and JYD vs. Hughes and Cactus Jack, Bagwell vs. Flamingo, Steiners vs. Tatsumi Fujinami and Takayuki Iizuka, Valentine and Taylor vs. Freebirds for U.S. Tag Team title, Pillman vs. Sank for light heavyweight title in War Games. May 3rd in Chicago drew $3,000 and $26,000 as Hayes pinned Page, Valentine pinned Bagwell, Koloff beat Vader via DQ when Race interfered, Simmons pinned Taylor, Bad pinned Smothers, Zank pinned Hughes, Wyndham and Rhodes beat Austin and Zbyszko, Rude beat Steamboat via DQ in 22:47 of a super match when Steamboat hit Rude with a chair and Steiners won the belts from Anderson and Eaton in a cage match. The readers' pages. Eric Larson of P.O. Box 115, Kenilworth, Illinois 60043 is looking for Wrestling Observer yearbooks from 1987-89. Lance Levine of 507 watts, 43rd PL, Chicago, Illinois 60609 is looking for a VHS tape of the Geraldo Rivera Show with Rita Chatterton. Sue Shooter of Flat 114 Holloway Street, Mormon 3163 Victoria, Australia is going to be in the US from late August through early October and is looking to see if any readers can put her up during her stay. Jeffrey Cohn of 8706 N Meridian Street, Indianapolis, Indiana 46260 is looking for programs from Indianapolis shows from the 1970s and any videotapes from that era of the WWA wrestling. Mike Richardson of 4214 Hickory Road No. 1C, Mishawaka, Indiana 46545 is looking for VHS tapes of the Phil Donahue Show, Larry King Show, Smoky Mountain Wrestling, Buck Robley's Group, any tapes of Dick the Bruiser, and any tapes from the 1970 Michael Rubin of 5 Donald CT Elmont New York 11003 is looking for tapes of old matches. Kevin Burke of P.O. Box 542, Albany, New York 12202 is looking for pre-1989 Wrestling Observer yearbooks. Joe Stein of 2010s. 11th Street, Sheboygan, Wisconsin 53081 is looking for AAA tapes from the 1970s. Jesse Earhart of 930 Sun Valley Avenue, North Tonawanda, New York 14120 is headed to Florida in late May and early June and would like to find out any dates of live shows. Stuart Dinkus of 13913 Dressler Avenue, Garfield Heights, Ohio 44125 has 60s and 70s wrestling videos of WWF, Japan, IWA, NWA, Canadian, Big Time Wrestling, All-Star, etc. for trade. Wrestlemania. Major thumbs down. I've sat through bad booked shows based on tasteless war exploitation, screwjob endings, but no show has ever left me with such a dislike for the wrestling business. We got uninspired ring work, lousy booking, and the return of the anabolic warrior. With the exception of Piper vs. Hart, I've never seen so many unrealistic and stupid screwjob endings on one card, including the 1991 Great American Bash. The only two guys on the card who looked like major league wrestlers were Bret Hart and Ric Flair, and Bret had to deal with working with Roddy Piper. Flair was as great as ever, and it gets him nowhere. At least if they put Jim Hellwig on top, they don't have to worry about him lying on Arsenio, because he doesn't have the verbal coherence to make an intelligible sentence. Either Lex Luger is juiced to the gills or he's suddenly developed elephantitis of the upper body. It looks like the top pushes for the future are Justice, Warrior, Luger, and Papa Shango. I guess we can scrap any idea of Titan being serious about an anti-steroid stance as if it were ever seriously considered. How come the question or whether Bill Clinton may or may not have smoked pot in college makes him in some people's eyes Judas, Stalin and Manson all rolled into one, but Vince McMahon tolerated, if not actually condoned, drug abuse, sexual blackmail and child molestation, and maybe even rape, and all the media does is sneer and shake it off because it's just wrestling. I guess anyone who has ever been employed in wrestling by that fact is then stripped of any consideration of being a real human being. Matt Creamer. Oshkosh, Wisconsin. DM presidential candidates should be held under more scrutiny than wrestling promoters. It's fair to say McMahon tolerated and condoned steroid use and even abuse. Whether he condoned and tolerated sexual blackmail is dependent upon the veracity of Hodgson's claim. But I don't know that it's fair to say he tolerated and condoned child molestation. When he says he's never even heard rumors or said the media was hiding the story from him, his defense does seem to lack credibility, but being a sloppy cover-up man doesn't mean he condoned or tolerated the alleged actual act. Vince McMahon. I realize it's politically incorrect to compliment Vince McMahon considering all the controversy that has surrounded him as of late, but the WWF has been more entertaining in 1992 than in nearly any other year of the past decade. Sam Knorr. Arcata, California. DM politically incorrect. The only thing politically incorrect is to somehow try and link a tie-in between work rate or success, or lack thereof, at the box office with determining how serious alleged sex crimes are. No matter what is written about steroids and the work rate, Vince McMahon isn't going to change a thing. The WWF has almost nothing to do with wrestling anymore. It now resembles the Argentine kids wrestling show that was on television here 10 or 15 years ago, where all the wrestlers dressed up like clowns in a phony circus tent. Please limit your coverage of steroids to a Newsweek-style chart with arrows to indicate your opinion of a specific performer's juice usage and overall trends, and let's get back to wrestling. Defamation laws on public figures protect you on this issue. I'm far more interested in Jim Cornette's plans for Smoky Mountain Wrestling than in Vince McMahon. Anyone who can appreciate the All-Japan Women's Tag match with Yamada and Toyota vs. Hata and Minami knows how ridiculous the WWF has become. On a sadder note was the passing away of longtime Olympic auditorium announcer Jimmy Lennon. I've been to sellout boxing riots and pro wrestling shows with 125 fans in attendance, and his demeanor never changed. He was always the eloquent gentleman who remembered the names of the regular fans and a real class act. Bob Barnett. Santa Monica, California. UWFI. I represent the UWF International in several areas, mostly in regard to foreign, non-Japanese matters. I am involved in making arrangements with foreign fighters that participate in UWF International promotions and directly negotiated all the details with Trevor Berbick and James Waring in regard to their appearance in Tokyo on December 22. Your report on them, how they performed and why, was unfortunately quite inaccurate. You gave the impression that they had been double-crossed. I assure you that I personally, in the presence of both their managers and their attorneys, explained to them exactly what they were getting into and what was expected of them. I told them they were coming for a shooting match and they accepted those terms. They then performed less adequately than promised. In the case of Berbick, the word defraud would be the best description of his actions. In a later newsletter you reported that Koji Kao has signed a multi-bout contract with each fight in excess of $150,000. This is wrong. He has a one-time deal making much less than you reported. On May 8 in the Yokohama Arena, Matthew Saad Muhammad will take on Kiyoshi Tamura in a mixed match. Saad Muhammad is a former WBC light heavyweight boxing champion. He has been told exactly what to expect. I have sent him a videotape of several UWFI matches which he has received. His people tell me he will put on one hell of a fight. The fight will be 100% on the level. A total shoot. I'm hoping for a really good, exciting match and the best man will win. Tamura is using a sparring partner who was a great fan of Saad Muhammad's and preparing him for what to expect. Saad Muhammad's manager traveled to Tokyo many years ago with the Muhammad Ali people when he fought Antonio Inoki, so he knows a little of what this is all about. Gene Pelk, UWF International Booking Agent, Tokyo, Japan. DM, Waring himself claimed after the fight he had been double-crossed in complaints to the Japanese press after losing the decision. We reported that Billy Scott, Waring's opponent, and Nobuhiko Takada, Berbick's opponent, were shooting. Berbick did make comments to Japanese reporters in preparing for the fight, which weren't printed, which indicated he was taking it as an exhibition. We did get reports that when Berbick got to Japan, he was trying to get someone to change the rules to ban the kicks to the knees, which indicates he may have realized differently when he got to Japan or didn't want to go in the ring with someone who he thought would go after his knees. We reported Cao's deal as $75,000 per match, not $150,000. Wrestling scandal reactions. Based on what I've read in the newsletter, I find it appalling so many people are unwilling to take the recent steroid issue and sex abuse issues seriously because it's all fake anyway. I've been criticized for my life of pro wrestling for more than 20 years. Wrestling is no different from any soap opera, television show or movie except that wrestling is performed live in front of an audience. Whether pro wrestling is legitimate sport or not is not an issue of concern. What is important is that if wrestlers and other personnel feel that to gain success or advancement in their careers they must either chemically alter themselves or bow to pressure from superiors to compromise themselves sexually, those problems aren't unique to wrestling. Thanks to Vince McMahon, the average wrestling fan has been brainwashed into believing that bigger is better. Watching WCW and EMLL on television every week makes me see through that, especially when I see a match like Brian Pillman vs. Jushin Liger or a wrestler like Yoshihiro Asai. I think wrestling promoters, bookers and executives need to change the business, and anyone who uses their position to gain sexual favors from employees should be booted out on the spot. Pro wrestling has enough of an image problem without the sex revelations. It's up to McMahon to clean up his own house and the industry will be better off for it. Rob Moore, Garland, Texas. I just wanted to thank you for your efforts and concern in reporting the WWF steroid and sex scandal stories. Without a doubt this is the biggest story in pro wrestling this year or any other year and should be reported and discussed at length. Yeah, I'm sure there are some fans who might be tired of this but they aren't looking at it. In the long run, this story could and may very well change pro wrestling for the better for both the wrestlers and for the fans. We need to take our time to understand what is going on, voice our feelings toward the issues and shed light on the underbelly of pro wrestling. John Hitchcock, Greensboro, North Carolina. As a steady reader for the past 6 years, it totally amazes me on the number of letters you receive in defense of the recent actions of Vincent McMahon. I understand that everyone is entitled to their side of the story on these scandalous accusations, but how can even his disciples agree with his contemptible methods and reactions? The evidence thus far is overwhelming. With each and every story that comes out, the attempts to hide the truth become more laughable with the continuing attempts to divert attention elsewhere or asinine rebuttals. Granted, Bruno Sammartino, Billy Graham, Billy Jack Haynes and others are not exempt from being criticized for their overall behavior. They were all well aware of the circumstances of what the wrestling business was, better known as wholesome, family entertainment. These stories would be a little easier to stomach if the WWF would admit to the truth, but that is a foreign word to the McMahon regime. In the coming weeks, we need to read more stories replete with accuracy and integrity. People such as Phil Mushnick and yourself have utilized their reporting ability to keep up abreast of the latest activities. William O. Zanuck, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Although certain news stories may sicken and disgust many, if they are important, there is an obligation to cover them. Your coverage of the WWF sex and steroid story have been outstanding. The riots in Los Angeles were tragic and gut-wrenching. But the media had the obligation to cover the story. The WWF sex and steroid scandals pale in comparison as far as importance, but they are some of the biggest news stories in the history of the pro wrestling world, and there is no reason to ignore them as Vincent K. McMahon has tried to do for so long. The only good reason for you to stop coverage of these stories is when these stories end, by their own destiny, not by your hand. Evan Schlesinger. Great Neck, New York. Independence. I write this letter to all the independent workers that depend on independent promoters for work and exposure. There are more than enough of us, and as you know by now, it is a struggle to get your foot in the door or to even get looked at by the big organizations. That's why I want to make you aware to stay clear of Thomas J. Cussetti, who claims to run Pro America Championship Wrestling out of Pelham, New York. I take a quote from a letter dated March 16, 1992 from the New York State Athletic Commission. Per your inquiry dated March 11, 1992, Thomas Cussetti has never been issued a license of any type by the New York State Athletic Commission. Signed, Stephen M. Waldma, Public Information Officer. I take another quote from a letter dated March 30, 1992 from Mount St. Michael Academy in the Bronx, where the supposed show was to take place. It reads, in response to your letter of March 19, 1992, Mount St. Michael Academy was not booked for a professional wrestling even on Saturday, June 29, 1991, signed Richard J. Tricario, Academic Dean. Now myself and the Sheik, Ed Farhat, are taking this person to court to prove that independent wrestlers can't be played with or tied up for dates if they want to go around and fraudulently represent themselves. Bedri Kullah, Abdullah Farouk Jr. Titusville, Florida. IWF. I know there is a conspiracy against the IWF. Why? Because every time you mention IWF, you always throw in Eddie Mansfield's name. It's the IWF. Why do you try to toss a label on it? Have you even seen our cards? We run 10 to 15 shows every month and still get no respect. Bill Apter must be on Dusty Rhodes and Vince McMahon's payroll not to ever cover the IWF. What about you? All I know is that someday the real wrestling fans are going to have a chance for themselves to make up their own minds, and you and Bill Apter will be eating crow for not helping a very hard-working group of guys. Already real wrestling fans from out of state have gotten to see the IWF, and were very impressed. Why don't you get of your high WWF, WCW, Global and Japan covering horse and cover a promotion that really works hard? Ron Galletti, Nasty Ronnie. Orlando, Florida.